Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brent Hoskins, Executive Director of the Business Technology Association, and I'd like to welcome you to today's BTA Building My Business webinar. Today's webinar is Transforming Your Business Starts with Planning. It will be presented by Ken Edmonds, who's the principal of 22nd Century Management. If you have questions along the way, just type your questions into the Zoom Q&A or chat, and Ken will address your questions at the end of his presentation. So with that, let's get started. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Brent. I appreciate that. And I want everybody to look at the slide that we're sharing. The BTA's national conference is coming up and you don't want to miss it. So I would encourage everybody, if you haven't registered, to do that. I can't help, I got to put a plug in for Brent and the company. Okay. So I'm going to move my poll, pop right up in my way. I can get it out of the way. Okay. So in our discussion today, we're going to talk about transforming your business and the fact that we really want to start with a business plan. So I had asked this question to start with, and hopefully you guys are working on filling out the poll. I would appreciate it really if everybody would participate. And by the way, I see a couple of people that have been through the training that I offer through the BTA. Say hi to Tom and Matt Neffet. I saw you there. Just a quick look going down. Just at a quick glance, that's all I see. So it's nice to have you guys with me today as well. But this is the question that you have to think about is, what is your plan? And we want to, actually, before we get started, I'm going to say, I ask if you would, either in the chat or actually preferably in the chat, let me know where you're watching from. We have Hilliard from Midland. Nice to have you guys with us. Hopefully we've got more of you that are going to participate. Let me know where you're watching from. And you'll see the poll pop up in Zoom, and I see some people starting to answer it. I would love to see if we could get, again, 100% participation in it. I don't see who said what, but we're going to share that. And Steve's from Connecticut. Nice to have you with us. Okay. So the question that probably is all in everybody's mind is why are we doing this webinar? And there are some reasons. I'll share a couple of stories with you. And I will start with my story. When I started my Copier dealership, actually I started a company in El Paso, Texas, back in the early 90s. And I wasn't even sure what the company was going to be, because when we started it, we had a travel agency and a cartridge remanufacturing operation in the same office. And we were kind of trying to see what worked best. And we found out really quickly that being a travel agent in El Paso in the early 90s, when the average airfare was $49, was a very easy and very enjoyable way to lose money. So we stopped that and we focused our attention on the business of remanufacturing toner cartridges. And that was a good business and things were working well. And then what happened, and hi, Rich from Milwaukee, I see you there. And by the way, Rich, you got to say hi to all the guys there at OCE for me. Let them know I said, hey. But I decided, that we were going to start that, and we started focusing. We're doing pretty good. And then one day I was selling toner for, at this time I was selling Toshiba toner for Laniers, because Toshiba made Laniers. And I walked into the Toshiba dealer and told him I needed to buy a drive gear, because sometimes the drive gears were different and I'd forgotten to order one. And the guy got smart with me and he said, I wouldn't sell you that gear if you were the last person on the planet. And I'm not a person that gets mad, but I never settle for even. So I walked out and I called Toshiba. Now, this is my business planning process. I walked out, I called Toshiba, the Toshiba DSM called me because they weren't real happy with this guy's production. And 90 days later, I was a Toshiba dealer. Now, my only experience in the copier industry in any way, shape, or form, because I had been an air traffic controller. So my only experience was I'd been doing remanufactured cartridges and fixing like Canon PC-25s and Sharp Z50s. And I'd done a little bit of other work because I had found out that I could fix equipment pretty well. I was pretty good technically. But that was the end of my business planning in that process. And then all of a sudden I had a warehouse full of equipment I had to sell, and I had to find and hire and train salespeople, all of which I didn't know anything about. And it got to the point that my business almost failed. And we dug ourselves out. I got the education I needed, but I never did create a real business plan. I had a business plan that was, and you'll hear me use this term again, with smoke and mirrors, that I took to the bank trying to borrow money. And probably a lot of you have those, and please don't be insulted, but you have the smoke and mirror plans that you use for the bank. You go into the bank, you need to borrow some money, you got to have a business plan. You want an SBA loan, you got to have a business plan. So we create these documents. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a business plan and the type of business plan that will drive your business the direction that you want it to go. It's interesting, and the reason I have the note about service managers up there is because I've taught in the classes I teach through the BTA. And by the way, there is a new session starting in June. So if you have service managers that can benefit from training, you will want to go ahead and get them signed up for the June semester. But it is really interesting that 50 plus service managers that have been through the program, none of them have had a business plan for their service department. In fact, I'm going to look at the poll questions. We got a bunch of them up here. Let's see. So right now I have, I lost my poll. I got to find it now. Oh, it popped over to the other screen. It's like, where'd it go? So when I asked the question, detailed business plan for the next 5 years, 70% said no. Managers have a business plan for their departments that they help craft. 74% said no. When you think about adding a new product or category or service, do you create a business plan? You guys are, commend this group. 61% said yes. We still had 39% that, and I'll just let it keep running here. But anyway, 39% said that they don't. So again, in the classes that I taught, the number was close to zero. And the reason it's important, let me, in the chat, let me know what you think, how long you think it takes to train a service technician from bring them in the door till they're really ready to go in the field. So let me get a couple answers here. What do you think? I see 12 months, 6 months. And I'll say the 12 months, they might be able to go out and do a little bit, but till they're fully efficient, you're looking at 3 years. So that means if your service manager is hiring a new tech today, they're hiring a tech that's really going to hit his stride in 2024. Now, if your service manager doesn't know where his department is going to be in 2024, how does he make a good decision on who to hire and how to train them and all of those things? So it is really a very important piece of what you do is that you have a plan. And I would encourage all of you, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this piece of it, but I would encourage all of you to look out 5 years and think about what the next 5 years and where do you want your company to be. We'll come back to some of that in a minute. Here's an adage we've probably all seen, and it's interesting. This quote gets attributed to a lot of people, but I think in reality, it goes back to Benjamin Franklin, but I couldn't find it on a slide I liked, and this one looked okay. Almost matches my colors. But failing to plan is planning to fail. And so I'm going to share a couple of more stories with you about this. Well, I wanted one, but I got two. So we'll start with the top one about production color. And these are things that happened with dealers that I supported when I worked for the manufacturer. And for those that don't know me, I spent 18 years, 10 with Sharp, 8 with Konica Minolta, supporting dealers, supporting dealer service departments. And I got to see a lot of things along the way. And these, I was involved in both of these with dealers I was supporting. And the first one started when a dealer went to the dealer meeting. And just in case you don't know this, the reason there's an open bar typically at a dealer meeting is not because your manufacturer loves you. It is because after enough trips to the open bar, you will sign anything. And so in the first case, one of the dealers I supported came back with I'm sure he got a really good deal on it. He came back with 6 production color machines he'd signed for. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. So typically, I know I would always put stuff 30, 60, 90 financing. So what's going to happen when that first payment is due? What's going to be the emphasis in the company for those light color production machines? What's everybody going to have to do now? Because the bill is coming due. I'll give you a minute to put your answer in the chat. I like getting you guys to participate. What is going to be the most urgent thing when that bill comes due? Oh, nobody wants to play. There we go. Sell the machines, discount them to move the product. That's right. We got to get them out of the warehouse. And at this point in time, the owner's telling the salesman that he doesn't care where they put them, just get them gone, get them sold. So all 6 of these machines this dealer had wound up in mom and pop print shops. Now these are pretty well loaded machines with fireys, high-end finishers, extra paper deck, the whole schmear. And about 5 or 6 months later, what happened is the service manager reached out to me and he said, Ken, I need your help. We're losing money on these machines. And I said, well, do me a favor, send me the documentation so I can see what's going on. Because I thought it was equipment issues. Okay, so here's what I found is these machines were averaging about 3,000 to 5,000 pages a month. And we're talking about 60 pages a machine, a 60 page a minute machine. So in reality, these machines weren't even really idling good. And you can think about what would happen if you took a Porsche out to the go-kart track and tried to drive it, for a long time. What's going to happen is it's not going to work so good. And that was exactly what happened with these machines. They weren't running well at all. They had a lot of setup costs built into them because a lot of time and energy that was all built against the equipment. And some of it was kind of dubious because one of them had like 10 hours of network setup associated with it. Not sure why, but I had to go back to the owner and to the service manager and say, I'm sorry to tell you this. You will never make any money on those machines where they are, and there's nothing I can do to help you. That wasn't what they wanted to hear, but that was the facts. The 3D printers, a very similar situation, and maybe even worse, because dealers, probably principal and sales manager went to the national dealer meeting. They showed off these nice, really amazing 3D printer, and they made all kinds of really cool stuff. And there was going to be a great market for them. You're going to be able to sell them everywhere. 2 of my dealers, and these were very experienced, very, what I would consider high-end quality dealers. 2 of them came back with demo packages. So a rosin-based machine and a powder-based machine. Hilliard said they gave some away, yeah. Okay, I helped them set them up, and I don't know what the total investment, but I'm going to say it's probably between $150,000 and $200,000. By the time you got the machines, the supplies, the training. They sent their text, the training came back, I went in and helped them. We set up the equipment. And when I retired 3 years later, or maybe a little more than that, those pieces of equipment for both dealers were sitting in exactly the same place. They hadn't moved. Now, one of the dealers had an opportunity to sell it, but because they weren't sure how to make money on the aftermarket and how to price service and several other things, what happened is they walked away from the sale. One of the rosin machines had sat still so long that the material had clogged up the tubes, and it was an expensive repair to get it fixed. Well, what do both of these have in common? Is they bought this equipment without a plan. They didn't have a clue, and they bought it anyway. So let me ask you this question. If you didn't know where you were going and you didn't know how to get there, would you get in the car and start driving somewhere? Most of us, the answer to that's going to be no. Now, I have a question I'm going to ask here, but the guys at Hilliard can't play. Okay. So you have no map or no GPS with you. We're not going to go anywhere. So now let's say that I had $1 million waiting for you in Earth. And there's a city in the US called Earth. What would you do? Would you just get in your car and start driving? Most of us wouldn't do that, especially if we didn't know where it was or have a GPS that could look it up for us. For the most part, most of us aren't going to do that. We're going to figure out where we want to go and start to build a plan on how to get there before we get in the car. Yet, at least in the cases that I'm talking about, we had dealers. Well, and me too. I'll include myself in that group because I told you my story. We got in the car and started driving and hoped we wound up somewhere we liked. Another question. So would you get up in front of a large audience to speak without having some notes and an idea of what you're going to talk about? We wouldn't do these things. We would prepare for all of these things before we started moving. And so that's my encouragement to you is that you think about the process of planning first and executing later, because the execute first doesn't work so well. So we're going to talk about the term transform for just a second. And there's a lot of words that are associated there that some of them are actually harder to figure out than transform. But the bottom line is it means to change something into something else. And so when we're talking about changing your dealership, we're talking about changing your dealership, the way your company operates from what it's doing right now to doing something different. It might be a little bit different, and it might be big different. But we're going to make it different than we are today. So the question is what do we need to do? And for those of you that are a fan of Stephen Covey, that is the second habit of highly effective people. Start with the end in mind. Now, it's interesting that in that chapter of the book, when he writes about that, he uses the illustration of you're attending your funeral and somebody's up there giving your eulogy. I had to find the word there. So they're giving your eulogy. And he said, what would you want them to say about you? And then he makes the point that if you want to have some control over what people say about you, you've got to be intentional in what you do. You've got to start working toward that result that you want. And so it is the same thing in business, is that we need to think about where do I want to go? What do I want? So, and I go back to the thinking about the next 5 years. 5 years from now, where do I want my company to be? Because if we're headed this direction over here, and we really want to be over here, we're going to have to turn the ship in that direction. And for most businesses, turning the ship is not something that happens on a dime, unless we get into, into between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. And we've got to make an immediate emergency adjustment, which the pandemic did for some of us. But what we want to do is we want to think about, okay, what are the pieces that I need to put in place to make the adjustment to get the direction I want to go? And as we work on that, and then we need to start working on creating our plan. I am huge, and for those that have been through my service management class, I talk a lot. And if you've heard me speak to BTA audiences before, you know that I see a lot of changes that threaten our industry. The pandemic drove the issue of declining print volume home in a big way. But there are other things that are threats. Ink is a threat to a lot of dealers. The constant run to the bottom. I am convinced that it's going to be hard for dealers to make money when we're charging double or nothing for clicks. That seems to be the direction we're headed. So we have all of these external forces out there. And we want to think about, okay, how do I create a business that is not at risk and that is, how do I say, immunized? We'll use that term. We've all been getting immunized lately. Immunized against the threats that exist out there. How do I future-proof my business? And in general, if we're going to prepare for the future, we need to think about doing things differently. Now, there may be little itty bitty differences in what you're doing. And like I said, some dealers are making huge transitions. That's a decision that you have to make for your company. That's not something I can tell you what to do. Though I have, and I won't share them right now today, but I spent 10 days sharing information about what I think is the best way to prepare your businesses for the future. So the first question is, what products and services are you going to be offering 5 years from now? And you should have this down in writing in a document. What are we going to be doing 5 years from now? And this should, again, we'll talk during the discussion about how we get from where we are to that point. Similar type question. How is my business going to change? Am I going to change the finance model? Am I changing the sales model? Am I changing the compensation model? How do I, and I would encourage sometimes, I think that this is a good exercise, is to start with a blank piece of paper and just design the business you want in 5 years. Don't think about where am I today? What do I want my business to look like in 5 years? So you can call it the blank sheet approach. We'll just take a blank sheet of paper. What does my product mix look like? What do my customers look like? What, all the different things that we want to think about for our future. What does that look like? And paint it in just kind of broad strokes, but because the things that we want are going to cause us to change our business. The things, the external focus or the external forces around us are going to force us in most cases to change our business. I'm a fan of taking control of my destiny rather than letting others push me in the direction that I wind up going. That was one of the problems I had when I owned my business, was I started out just letting external forces dictate what I did. And it was by becoming more intentional after I got some training and learned more about the industry, because like I said, I started with no experience, that I started to see the value of building out plans and becoming intentional. So once we know where we need to be in 5 years, where we want to be in 5 years, what that company looks like, or our company looks like in 5 years, at that point in time, we're ready then to start working on creating a plan. But again, we can't create a plan until we know where we're going. It goes back to that Earth. And the reason Hilliard couldn't play was because Earth is not far from them. It is close to Muleshoe, Bovina, and Friona. And there used to be a Dairy Queen commercial that featured Earth, Texas, and it was everybody on Earth eats at Dairy Queen. Now, I don't know if I was living in the Southwest when I saw that, so it may not have been a national commercial, but it was pretty funny because the town was not very big. So we'll start with a minor transformation. We're going to make a little change. Okay. And so we'll pick, let's say we wanted to make the move into production color. Assuming you don't do it, but it's some change like that is relatively minor. Well, there's pieces to making this change that we need to think about. The first part of it is, what does the business model look like? If I sell this, how do I make money? How do I make money in the sale? And how do I make money in the aftermarket? What does my recurring revenue look like? Next question is, who will want to buy it? And this is a really important question. And I will give you an example why. Again, this was a dealer that's in general pretty smart. But the sales guy's out prospecting around and he finds a customer. Now, this customer is 60 miles from the nearest branch office. And I don't know why it is that salespeople love to get as far away from the branch as they can get to sell. But anyway, 60 miles away from the branch office, he finds an opportunity to sell a wide format color laser device. Big ticket sale. Yep. So he goes out and sells it. And in the 4 or 5 years that I was around after the sale went down, they never sold another one. Now, the worst thing you can have in the world from a service perspective is an orphan machine like this, because it's very expensive to get the training for it. And you've got a lot of money that you tie up in parts and supplies to support it. And you have one of them, so your technicians never get good at fixing it. So the first question, before we even decide to order one, think about selling one, any of that, is we have to answer the question, who will want to buy it? What is the total number of units, the potential that exists out there? Then the next piece of it is, what can they pay for it? What will they pay for it to still work and be profitable for your customer, for your end user? And the last piece is, how many do we need to have in the field to make it worth the investment of getting set up? And again, all of these are questions that you need to work your way through and try to make sure you understand the answers to these before you ever sign an order from your manufacturer. And I don't care what the manufacturer tells you about them selling like hotcakes. Everybody's going to want one. Your manufacturer's sales rep, his sole goal in life is to get you to buy stuff. And I will say that with a few exceptions, because I have worked with and known sales reps that really cared about helping their dealer figure out the sell-through. But for the most part, most manufacturers' sales reps, all they care about is getting the equipment into your warehouse so they can get a commission check. They're just like your salespeople have quotas to meet, they have quotas to meet. And just like your salespeople will sometimes sell equipment where it doesn't need to go to meet their quotas, so will the manufacturer's sales reps. And again, I'm not slamming the manufacturer, because the sales reps have a quota on them. The U.S. subsidiary has a quota they have to meet because the factory's busy making this stuff. But until you know that you can sell it and make money on the sale and make money on the aftermarket, and you can sell enough of them to justify the investment, you don't want to sign that order. It's not one of those things. Go back to think about that dealer that bought the color production machines, or we think about the dealer that bought the 3D printers. Do you think that they wish they could go back and undo what they did? I'm here to tell you, I know for a fact all of them would gladly undo that transaction. You know, they made a decision to do something without planning it. And by the way, if you guys have any questions about any of this, do me a favor, go ahead and put them in the question Q&A box so that I will kind of keep an eye on it. We'll answer them at the end, but as we're going through this, please feel free to go ahead and pop the questions in as they come up to you. You know, part of that, you know, is tied in with this expense to break even. How much training is involved? How many, you know, because if we send one technician to class, we're probably very easily at $1,000 to $1,500 tied up in that process. So how many, again, you know, he's got to have enough of them out in the field so that he can stay good at it. And they have to be concentrated enough. If you cover an entire state, you know, like Hilliard's, if they had to cover all of Texas, they're sure not going to be selling equipment out on the far reaches, especially something they only have one or two of, you know, so you got to think about, okay, how much of them can we sell in an area that one tech could service? All of these are pieces that need to be included. And that's why it becomes important. And we'll talk more about it as we go farther, but that's why it is very important that you have the service manager and the sales manager and your admin people all sitting down together to build out this plan so that we can look at the impact on all of the departments. Okay. And again, I'm going to talk about how much and how long. Okay. So I'm going to make this statement, and I think this is probably a challenge for people that are still in the entrepreneurial mode in their company. In other words, if you started the company and you've been driving it and you make all the decisions, this can be a real challenge for you to start changing your behavior. But there's real value in doing it. You want to make your planning a management team decision. And like I said, it may be uncomfortable and different, but you want to get your service manager, your sales manager, your owner, your admin team, you all want to sit down together and try to figure out, okay, where do we want to be? Or maybe you've decided as the leader of the Motley crew that this is where we want to be. You still want to get everybody involved in the planning piece of it, because as you start to make changes, it almost always affects everybody else in the business. So if we add a new product, it may require changes in how we bill it. And so admin needs to be involved. The sales team, obviously, because they're going to sell it, needs to be involved. If it's something that needs service, the service team's got to be involved. It's going to impact them. So you really, truly want to get all of the departments that are affected involved in the planning process, because they will know the impact on their area probably better than anybody. And they'll be able to start to look at what the challenges might be and what are the pieces that they have to do in their little piece of the company to be able to start getting ready for that shift that you want to make. And it's interesting. One of the things that I teach in the service management class is I encourage the service managers that I'm training to teach their employees to think like owners, so that they'll start to understand and think and make good decisions when they're working with customers, trying to help customers. And so as the leader of the company, I would encourage you to make sure that you're mentoring your managers, teaching them how to think like owners. I'll tell a quick story on myself, and I tell this in the class all the time. But when I worked for a dealer, because after I had my dealership for a while, I decided I could not manage salespeople effectively. And I sold my dealership and went into service management because that was what I was really good at. That was my background. And I had an owner that had come up on the service side, and he did a really effective job of training me without me even realizing it. I'd go into this gentleman's office and I'd say, Tony, I think we should do this. And Tony would look at me and says, okay, why do you think that? What's it going to cost? What's my ROI on that? And what are the risks and benefits? And I'd leave his office and I'd go sit down and start to work through all those questions. And when I got it all worked out, I'd bring it back in. And first couple of times he looked at what I wrote up, and then he'd sign off and let me do whatever it was I suggested. But he taught me to think like an owner. In other words, those are the questions that as an owner you probably have. And so you want to develop in your management team that thought process, think like owners. And part of that obviously is getting them involved in the planning process. So we start, again, we go back to where do we want to be? When do we want to be there? So again, we go back and we think about we're going to Earth, Texas. Now I told you where you want to be. Okay, so we get the map out, and the $1 million is only good there for 2 days. So depending on where you are in the country, you can start to figure out, okay, I've got to drive 2,000 miles. It means I got to do 1,000 miles a day. That means I better get started and go pretty quickly. Well, it's the same thing with our company. So we decide where we want to be. And again, I encourage you very strongly to look out 5 years and look to see what will change in the business environment. Now, you're not going to get it all perfect. You're not going to get everything that you think to happen exactly like you think. But what you will do is you'll become more flexible and more nimble. And as the environment around you changes, it will be easy to make the adjustments because you have a process you've started building in place. And so you think okay, so if we're looking out 5 years, this is where we want to be in 5 years. So now I've got the where and the when. The next step is we can start to break the process down. So if I know where I want to be in 5 years, and I'll go back to my illustration. If I know I want to be in Earth, Texas, on Saturday by 5 o'clock, I live in North Carolina. So what I can do is at this point in time, I can say, okay, that means I have to start now. And by tomorrow night, I need to be in Dallas, probably, to make that reachable. And then I can say, okay, and then from Dallas to Earth. So I know where I need to go, and I've got broken down the first piece of it. Now, if I want to be in Dallas by 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, I can start to figure out when I need to be in Nashville and when I need to be in Memphis. And, all of those pieces start to come together that I can figure out my course. Well, it's the same thing here. Let's break the process down. What has to be done and by when? So if we were doing, for example, go back to, if we wanted to start selling 3D printers and we want to sell them in December of this year, that means as a service manager thinking about it, I've got 8 months to 7 months to get the training done. When are their classes? Okay, I can schedule this person and this person, and I can start to plug it in. So we start with what do we need to get done this year? So we take that 5-year plan we built, and we're going to build a 1-year plan now. What do I have to get done this year to be where I want to be in 5 years? I can now take that and break it down a little farther and say, okay, this quarter. So what do I need to get done this quarter to be where I need to be by the end of the year? Okay, that becomes pretty easy. If I know what I have to be done in this quarter, I can figure out what I have to get done this month. Sorry. Okay, I guess that was it. Now, if I know what I need to get done this month, I can figure out what I need to get done this week. And it just makes everything so much more orderly and logical if we work on this philosophy as a management team. Then what I would suggest is that when you back this up to say, hey, okay, this is where I want to be in 5 years, and give it to your department heads to create the plan for their department. Make them figure out what they need to do to get done what needs to be done. Will they get it right the first time? No, that's okay. Will they learn? Yes. And that's what's important. and you help them get to where they need to go, and help them build out their plan. And then the result is that everything will work better. So your service manager, your admin manager, your sales manager. Now, again, we're talking about adding new products. A couple other departments we got to add in there. Marketing. Because we got to, before we bring product in that we're going to try to sell, we should have the marketing pieces in place so that we know how we're going to market it. That means that our website needs to be updated. Our marketing materials need to be updated. Our sales training needs to be updated. That actually falls in sales probably. But all of these pieces, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's we've brought a new product in or we're going to revamp the company over the next 5 years. All of these things need to be looked at so that we're ready. So when do you create the plan? You create the plan before you pull the trigger on the project. You don't commit to something until you've done the planning. I go back to those dealers that had this equipment that they either wound up stuck with and just might as well have, taken $150,000 and run it through a paper shredder, or sold the 5 light production machines and bleed for 5 years on the lease. In both cases, they should have done the planning and they should have done, let me go back here. They should have done all of these things before they signed the order to buy that equipment. But they had such a deal. Well, I'm here to tell you that none of them thought it was a deal when all was said and done. So you create the plan before you commit. And this is kind of interesting. And I'll go back to what I spent a couple of weeks working on. Wes McDonald, a lot of you probably know him from Seat-Based Billing, and he and I partnered to put on a 10-day training seminars, 1 hour a day for 10 days about building out a flat rate program. And the reason we did that was to help dealers see what was involved, what they needed to think about, so they could make an intelligent decision about whether to start on the planning process. I would never encourage anybody to make that change without building out all of your plan first. And when you do that, you may look at the plan and decide that you don't want to do it. And that's a good thing. Because if we go back and we think about these dealers that had the 3D printers, if they'd gone through the plan and gone through and looked at all of the pieces of that, what would they have done? They'd have said, never mind. And they'd have been a lot of money ahead. The dealer with the production machines, they'd have been a lot of money ahead. The dealer with the one color wide format, they'd have been money and time and energy ahead. If they'd gone through the process of building out a business plan and then dealing with it and saying, okay, this doesn't make sense for us. We need to walk away from this. And like I said, that's a good thing. That's okay. It is better to create the plan and decide not to than it is to pull the trigger on something and wish you hadn't. And if you haven't figured this out, I'm really passionate. I really firmly believe this. And I mean, it's not just these examples. I saw it for 18 years working for the manufacturer with people pulling the trigger on something and regretting it afterwards, and not being able to fix it for them. Again, you want to train your team to be able to do this. If your team doesn't know how, there's some things you can do. If you're not really sure how to build out something that I'm talking about, that's okay too. Because what you can do, let's roll the thing the right direction. If you have the skill, you can train your team, teach them to think their way through it, ask them questions. By the way, my favorite way of training and leading people is to use questions. So lead them where you want them to go if they don't have the skill. Next piece of it is get training. There's a variety of places that you can get training. Third opportunity or third method is find somebody to help. Find somebody that can coach you on the process. That's one of the things I work with is the service managers. In fact, the new version of the course that I'm offering through the BTA, the very first thing they have to do is do a pest analysis in the second semester, is a pest analysis and a SWOT analysis. And I'm not talking for looking for and killing bugs, but those are the two first steps in creating a business plan. And then part of their project is to teach them to work through how to create a business plan, at least the strategic part of a 1-year part of a plan. And so again, the goal is to get your team where you can do this. You say, but that's expensive. Again, let's go back and look at the examples we talked about. How expensive were the bad decisions? Think about it in your business. How many decisions that you might have made differently if you'd gone through this business planning process before you did something? I don't know about you, but I know in my career, there's lots of things I would have done differently. If I go back to my company, I was making good money doing reman cartridges. It was costing me $12. I was selling them for $69. I could do them in my sleep. And if I'd had good sense, I'd have stayed just in that business, but I didn't have good sense. I didn't plan. I didn't think through the process. So I would encourage you again to work on doing this. I think you'll find it has the potential to make a huge difference in your business. So I will take any questions. I don't see any so far, but I'm gonna get a drink of coffee and I'll let you put in any questions or comments. If you don't have any questions, do me a favor in the chat, put some notes about what you took away from today's discussion that might be helpful.
All right, thank you, Ken. And as Ken mentioned, if you do have any questions or comments, put them into chat or the Q&A. And while we're waiting just for a moment, I'll mention that this webinar is being recorded. The link of to the recording will be available tomorrow on BTA's website, bta.org/BMB archives. You'll be able to find a link to the recording and a PDF of the PowerPoint to download if you'd like that as well. While on the page, I'd encourage you to go ahead and register for our next BTA Building My Business webinar. That is, Are We Delusional? Why New Business Development is More Important Than Ever. That webinar will be presented at 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, May the 20th. Our presenter will be Dennis Amorisano, who's president and founder of Dendog Strategy Insights, LLC. So I see a question, getting help to plan. Where's a good place to do that? You see that, Ken?
I see the question. And Rich, what I would say is, it's one of those things that you can reach out to me and I can help you with it. There's a lot of free training online that you can get help with it. There are probably some other consultants that will do it as well. But I would say that the key piece of it, and I know your guys' situation is like, so, I think it's really important to get started working on, okay, what is our plan? Where do we, again, we go back to sitting down and where do we want to go? Because in that business plan, just a couple of pieces, you have the pest analysis, the SWOT analysis, 5-year plan, your 1-year strategic plan. You need a marketing plan. There's just so many pieces that you want to put into your plan to make sure that it's robust enough that you can use it to move forward. And again, like I said, I'm a firm believer in the process of getting everybody in one room and let's sit down and start talking about it. Let's look at and think about what it is we can, where do we want, again, we go back to where do we want to go? And then all the different players, what do we have to do to make this work? And like I said, you can reach out to me, Rich, and we can talk some more about it.
Thank you, Ken. Looking back at Q&A and chat, I see from Greg, I got great value out of the minor transformation with new product team planning and review. Thanks, Ken. Very good. So I had mentioned about the next webinar coming up on May 20th. I would like to mention to you as well that on the BTA website, I've mentioned this in previous Building My Business webinars, but never hurts to mention it again, that we currently now have recordings of 161 past BTA Building My Business webinars available on the members only section of the website. So I encourage you to access it as a resource, as a member of the association. Take advantage of that. So again, I don't see any other comments or questions. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up our webinar for now. Hey, Ken, thank you very much for your willingness to present today and give back to the industry like you do. We'll end the webinar for today. Attendees, as you exit, you're going to see a brief little survey pop up on your screen as in your browser. If you take a moment to complete that, it'd be greatly appreciated. It'll take you all of about a minute. And we would thank you. We appreciate that. And we thank you for that. So again, the next webinar is 4 p.m. Eastern on May the 20th, and we'll see you then. Thank you all. Bye for now.
All right. Bye for now.